We still have over a month left in the college football season, but we're getting a better understanding of which teams are legitimate playoff contenders. Every week, we have a number of teams that are eliminated from contention. By my count, there are still 17 teams who have a realistic shot of reaching the college football playoff. Today, we're going to be taking a look at those 17 teams and seeing what needs to go right for them to make it there. We'll start off with Georgia, and theirs is fairly easy. They just got to win out, and they'll be in. For the Bulldogs, they can also afford one loss as well. Whether it's in the regular season or whether it's in the SEC title game, their road to the playoff is a pretty easy one. When taking a look at their schedule, they do have a couple of difficult games remaining, including number 16 Missouri, number 12 Ole Miss, and on the road at number 21 Tennessee, not to mention whoever they likely face in the SEC title game, which is probably going to be Alabama at this rate. So for the Bulldogs, it looks like they're going to have 4 ranked matchups on their schedule the rest of the way. It's a pretty difficult slate for Georgia, but like I said, they control their own destiny at this point. For Michigan, the same goes for them. They just got to win out, and they can afford one loss. When looking at the rest of their schedule, they have 2 ranked matchups, on the road at number 10 Penn State and number 3 Ohio State at home. They should go through the next 3 weeks unfazed, but it all comes down to that Ohio State matchup. It's probably all going to come down to that Ohio State game. If Michigan beats Ohio State, that pretty much guarantees their spot in the playoff. If they lose to Ohio State, they're still going to be in the running, but they might need to have a few things go their way. We'll flip things over to Ohio State, and the same could be said for them. When looking at the rest of their schedule, they have an easy 4-game winning streak coming up until they go on the road to take on number 2 Michigan. As of right now, I believe that Ohio State has the strongest resume in all college football, so if they were to lose to Michigan in the final week of the season, I think they'd be okay and they'd still have a good enough resume to get into the playoff. If they beat Michigan, well, that guarantees them a spot regardless of what happens in the Big Ten title game. Florida State should be in cruise control the rest of the way. They've gotten through the most difficult portion of their schedule, and barring a shocking upset, they should finish the regular season undefeated. Now, based on who they play the rest of the season, if they were to lose to any of these teams, that would certainly hurt their chances. But unless they drop 2 ACC games, they should make it to the ACC title game, so if they're able to pick up a victory in that title game, that should get them into the playoffs. Washington has been the best team in the Pac-12 this season, but man, do they still have a difficult schedule the rest of the way. They still have 3 ranked matchups, including 2 that are on the road. They got to play USC, Utah, and Oregon State in back-to-back-to-back weeks. Now, the Huskies could certainly make it out of that alive, but that's going to be asking for quite a lot. If Washington somehow makes it through the regular season undefeated, I don't think it matters what happens in the Pac-12 title game, they should be a playoff team. But if they lose one of those games to one of those ranked teams, well, they're going to have to make sure they win the rest of their games in dominating fashion. When looking at the rest of Oklahoma's schedule, it looks very easy for the Sooners. Now, although Oklahoma should win these final 5 games, I could see a scenario where they're on upset watch in all 5. I know they're going to be favored in all these games, but these are some pretty difficult opponents the rest of the way. For Oklahoma, considering they're ranked 6th right now, I don't think they can afford a loss in the regular season. And honestly, I don't think they can afford a loss the rest of the way. Considering the teams in front of them, I don't think they really have any chance of moving up anytime soon. The only chance they really have of moving up is if Washington loses in front of them, so that means Oklahoma's going to jump to 5th. Well, if that's the case, they can't lose, including the Big 12 title game. If they were to lose to Texas or whoever they play in that game, I don't see any possibility of Oklahoma still having a shot at the playoff. So it looks like the Sooners got to win out the rest of the way in the regular season and beat whoever they face in the Big 12 title game. The same could be said for Texas, especially considering they have 1 loss already. Their only chance is if they win out the rest of the way, and they gotta hope they're able to face Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. If they're able to face Oklahoma, who's still undefeated, that could be a massive top 5 win that really gives Texas that final push. But if Oklahoma has 1 or 2 losses, or they're playing a team like Iowa State, Oklahoma State, or Kansas State, beating them isn't going to be enough to get into the playoff. Much like with Washington earlier, Oregon has a pretty difficult schedule the rest of the way. They have 3 ranked opponents left on their schedule, the exact same 3 that Washington has to face. Now for Oregon, their road is a little more difficult because they already have a loss, so they can't afford a loss in the regular season or in the Pac-12 title game like Washington can. I think this slate is easier for Oregon than it is for Washington, mainly because 2 of these 3 are going to be at home. But the Ducks still have to have a lot go their way, and winning out these final 5 games will be difficult. Not to mentioned, they likely face Washington again in the Pac-12 title game, and whoever wins that game likely goes to the college football playoff. Despite losing in week 2, Alabama is still hanging around. They're 7-1 and they're ranked number 9 in the country. When looking at the rest of their schedule, there's only one game that needs to be circled, and that's next week as they host number 15 LSU. If they're able to knock off the Tigers, they should win their final 3 games of the season with ease. And if that's the case, they'll make it to the SEC title game with only 1 loss on the season. If all goes according to plan, they'll likely be facing Georgia. So if Alabama is able to knock off Georgia, they'll earn a spot in the college football playoff. If they lose to LSU next weekend or lose to Georgia in the SEC title game, their chances are completely shot. So for Alabama, it's pretty easy, just win out the rest of the way. Before we get to the rest of the teams, I'd like to share with you guys how you can win money and make the college football season even more exciting. I've partnered with Underdog Fantasy to bring you guys this amazing deal. If you download the Underdog Fantasy app and use promo code Harris, they'll match your first deposit up to $100. Yep, they're giving you up to $100 of free money. I've had a lot of success this season with college football and the NFL, and you can do the exact same with Underdog. So make sure to use promo code Harris for a 100% deposit match up to $100. You can also sign up using the link in my description as well. Although it's pretty unlikely, there's about a 2% chance that Penn State is still alive in the playoff hunt. The rest of their schedule is very easy, but they do have one difficult matchup as they host number 2 Michigan. Now, I think Michigan is going to go in there and knock them off, but anything can happen in college football. Let's say Penn State somehow manages to pull off that upset and they finish the regular season going 5-0. Well, that's not going to be enough for them because Ohio State has the tiebreaker due to their win this past weekend. So Penn State's going to have to ask Ohio State to drop 2 more conference games the rest of the way, which is a near impossible task. But like I said, it's not impossible. I'm just giving Penn State, like I said, a 1, maybe a 2% chance of all of that going right for them. How about this? We're at the end of October and Oregon State is still in the playoff hunt. The Beavers are 6-1 and they're currently tied for 3rd in the Pac-12. Their next 3 games should all be wins, but man, do they have arguably the toughest 2-game stretch to close the season in all of college football. They host number 5 Washington and then go on the road to take on number 8 Oregon. Hey, if Oregon State is somehow able to pull off victories in those 2 weeks, they'll earn a spot in the Pac-12 title game. I don't know who they'd be facing, but if they pick up a victory in that game, that should be a good enough resume to get them to the college football playoff. So for Oregon State, just win out. Ole Miss is still hanging around, but they need a lot to go their way. They do have the tiebreaker over LSU, which is huge, but they did lose to Alabama earlier in the season, so they'll need the Tide to lose 2 SEC games in order to have the advantage. Oh, did I mention that Ole Miss has to go on the road to play Georgia? Now sure, Ole Miss can go on the road and pick up that victory, but in order for them just to reach the SEC title game, you're asking them to go on the road and knock off Georgia, and you're asking Alabama to drop 2 SEC games. Oh, and even if all of that somehow still happens, Ole Miss still has to win the SEC title game. Again, it's not impossible, but the chances are pretty low. After this weekend's victory over USC, Utah is right back in the playoff hunt. They're tied for 3rd in the Pac-12 with a 3-1 conference record. Their remaining schedule is difficult as well, as they still got to face number 8 Oregon and go on the road to take on number 5 Washington. Because they already have a loss this season, any loss the rest of the way will eliminate them from contention. I mean, they could be eliminated this weekend when they take on Oregon. But for Utah, having these 2 top 8 teams on their schedule definitely benefits them. So if they're able to somehow knock off Oregon and knock off Washington, win out, and win the Pac-12 title game, I think the Utes make it in. I've talked about this in recent weeks, but although LSU has 2 losses this season, I still think there's a realistic chance they could be the first 2-loss team to reach the college football playoff. I mean, they go on the road to take on number 9 Alabama next weekend. If they knock off the Tide, they're in the driver's seat to play in the SEC title game. And if they make it there and take on an undefeated Georgia team and beat them, I think LSU has a legitimate resume. I mean, they'll have a victory over number 9 Alabama, they'll have a victory over number 21 Missouri, and they'll have a victory over the likely number 1 team in all of college football. When looking at their losses would be against a potential playoff team in Florida State and a potential top 15 team in Ole Miss. Again, I know a 2-loss team has never reached the college football playoff, but if LSU can knock off Alabama and Georgia in dominating fashion, I think the resume will speak for itself. We have another SEC team still hanging around, and that's number 16 Missouri. Their lone loss of the season this year came at home against LSU LSU, a team I was just hyping up. Missouri has plenty of chances to boost their resume as they go on the road to take on number 1 Georgia next weekend, followed by a ranked matchup against Tennessee. If they're able to win out the rest of the way and go to the SEC title game, they'll be taking on either Alabama or LSU. And if they're able to knock them off, I think the Tigers have a good enough resume that'll get them to the playoff. I know that's asking a lot based on the teams they have to play and the fact they have to win out, but Missouri is still alive. After losing this past weekend to Virginia, it seems impossible that North Carolina can even reach the college football playoff. Again, nothing is impossible in this video, but I'm giving the Tar Heels maybe like a 1 or 2% chance, because man, that's gotta be one of the worst losses we've seen this year. They're likely going to be favored in every game the rest of the season, but they do have a ranked matchup against Duke, and they do gotta go on the road to Clemson. If North Carolina is able to win out, they likely make it to the ACC title game. Now, let's say they take on Florida State, who could be ranked number 2 or number 3 at the time. If they dominate Florida State and win that game, this will be a Tar Heels team that finishes the season with 1 loss, and they'll be the ACC champion with a win over Florida State. Now, despite all of that, I'm not sure if that's a good enough resume, and there could be a realistic possibility that Florida State might even get in over North Carolina with a loss. So again, it's a very, very low chance that North Carolina can make it all the way, but it's not zero. We'll wrap up today's video with my final team in Louisville. The last time we saw them, they lost on the road at Pittsburgh by 17 points. But they're still tied for second in the ACC with a 3-1 conference slate. They have a ranked matchup against Duke this weekend, and they should win their final 4 games of the season. If that's the case, Louisville will have only 1 loss, and they'll likely be playing in the ACC title game. Just like I said with North Carolina, if Louisville is able to knock off Florida State, well, maybe you can make a case they should be in the playoffs. So we'll just have to wait and see, but Louisville is still slightly in the hunt. Well, those are the 17 teams that I think still have a shot of reaching the college football playoff. Is there a team I didn't include that you believe is still in the hunt? Whoever it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. I'm posting college football videos all season, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, don't forget to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.